to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. This is Tom Dutta, the host of the Quiet Warrior Show. And well, you probably know by now that you're live on Facebook. And this is a preview to a podcast that we're recording with my special guest. I'll introduce him in a minute. You might just see him there. The podcast will be released across all major internet radio stations. And the show we launched in 2016, we have guests from all over the world coming to share their authentic stories about their life and business and, well, all the learnings from the backstory. And so I'm excited today to bring on to the show. And I want to also recognize those who will watch the replay of this show. You're going to get a kick out of this, man. Welcome, Ron Zayas, to the Quiet Warrior Show.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on.
All right. I love that. I think you're one of the first few people who said good morning, good afternoon. That just about covers it, unless it's nighttime where you are. Hey, Ron, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I want to first say that this show is all about you. We bring on authentic leaders, and you and I connected through a source, and there's a lot that I've learned about you. And so why don't we turn it to you first, Ron? Tell us, just take a minute, because I'm going to fill in the blanks with your bio. Tell us something about yourself that you think most people don't know.
Well, number one, I was never convicted of anything, so let's just get that. No. I'm a big. So first and foremost, I've been in business my entire life. I don't know that it's my first love, but it's definitely what I can do and what I do well. But things I enjoy to do, I love British roadsters. I'm a big MG fan. An MG Midget was my first car in college, and it was a crappy car, and they still are crappy cars, but I enjoy them and love them, and that's my passion. And when I need to get myself centered, when I need to understand and decloud, I'm usually in a car on a road that I've never been on before. So that's
a pretty cool. That's a pretty cool thing. I mean, I'm already starting to go fast in my mind, and I was going to say, hey, you're not convicted of anything yet until you see the show.
The evening is young, so.
I'm just going to digress about passion. I do a lot of work about mental health and staying happy, and they say that there's three things to have good character, and one of them is to find passion. And when you infuse that into what you do, you show up with this aura, this light. And since you and I were talking before we went live, I see that in you. There's something about you, Ron. So I'm going to build you up a little bit and tell people a bit more. You can find this on Ron's website and bio, but he's a founder and CEO of a company called 360 BC Group. I kind of smiled because this is British Columbia, Canada, and I went, BC? Why didn't I hear about this guy? But not so much. But the thing I like about Ron's background is he's done a lot of things. He's an immigrant from Cuba, and we're going to talk a lot about that today as well. And not just starting a company of his own, but I read somewhere that you built a company, your first one, and you exited. So whether you bought 1 million MGs or one, I don't know how much you made from that transaction, but a lot of people wonder, how do you do that? You also have a fascinating story and a book and a lot of other things coming out or that are out. So we're going to get into your story. Ron, take us back. I mean, I started with a nugget there. You're from Cuba, and I read something in your bio. I'll lead you on this that I just highlighted it here. Something about supportive, intellectual support from his mother and father, guidance from mentors. Take us back to where it began.
I have always been very lucky in that I have really great parents. My mother, who's my saint, who's every time I was a little boy and needed something, she was there with a hug and a kiss. And my mom brought me lunch every day to school. And I remember a little boy one time telling me, why does your mommy bring you food? My mommy doesn't bring me food. And I said very meanly, well, maybe your mommy doesn't love you. And the boy started to cry. And I remember my mom coming up and hugging him and instantly making him feel better. And I realized I get that all the time, and not everybody gets that. I mean, I don't think his mom didn't love him. I was just being a wise ass. But my mom being able to come in and make everything feel better was what I grew up with, and it was very normal for me. And my father, although very strict and very affectionate, was always very good at advice. And in fact, the book that I wrote is all about the advice my father gave me and how I applied it in life. Those two things of having very committed parents who were involved. Dinner at our house was 2.5 hours long on a good day. And it was talking, and it was politics, and it was religion, and it was what you thought and what you did. I always thought everybody grew up with that. And as I got older and older, I started realizing that that wasn't the case, and that I was very lucky. And I think it did make me cocky, and I've gotten shot down a couple of notches sometimes for that, but it gave me a lot of confidence. And it really always gave me the confidence to figure out that no matter what was going on in life, that I was going to be okay, that one way or another was going to work out. And that's a different aspect to have in life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you said that. And I smiled when you said, maybe your mommy doesn't love you, because I spent a lot of time working on the topic of bullying, and I'm going like, man, if that was me, I would have decked you one.
Yeah. and I got decked a lot, I might add. So
but the other thing I read in your bio here, and I'm going to come back to the part of the conversation in a minute and just comment, because we're going to trade some stories here, is I read somewhere here about comedy, and interesting, you co-created a comedy show on a college radio station, and you were the lead writer for the alternative humor newspaper. So I already see that smile and that humor. And you know what, they say that sometimes you can talk about difficult things by using that. So I love that. Going back to you thought everybody grew up with that. Isn't that the story here? That when I grew up, as you know, I had you watch my TED Talk, which I just did. And in the book I wrote, I talked about a chapter in my life called The Boy. And we had dinners, but our dinners were, a father, command and control military dad. You talked when you could talk. And half the time my dad usually was drunk, and our family disappeared. Our dinners were not 2 hours. And then I married into a Italian culture, my beautiful wife, Anna. And for the first 10 years till her parents passed, going there for 2-3 hour dinners. And it's just this thing that I'm living vicariously through you here, man, because when you tell that story, dude, there are people all over the world, children, youth growing up, going to run this world, that are going like, I don't have that, so I can learn from him. So go back into that part of the story. So there you were, and I read somewhere, I'll just kind of throw this out there because my mind went in this direction. You were raised and nurtured. I think your father was ethical, successful like you, and then you were gifted apparently, and you went to school, and then apparently left school at age 16 to go to college. Tell us what happened. What's that all about?
And let me say two things on that. One, I just want to digress for 1 second, because my family dynamic, my marriage is the opposite of yours. My wife didn't grow up with a family support unit. Their parents were divorced. Her father had issues with addiction. And so her unit was very different from mine. And one of the first dinners my wife and I made on a date. And then she picked up the food and she walked to the living room to watch TV. And I sat at the table for 30 minutes, just sitting there. And then after about 30 minutes, she got up and walked over and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we eat dinner at the table and we talk. We don't watch TV." And she was like, "This isn't how I grew up." And it took many years, and especially when we had children and everything else, for her to really come to embrace that and understand how important, especially meals were for that time. But by the way, just to clarify, I was asked to leave high school. I don't know that that it was the decision that I made, that I decided to do this. And after I was asked to leave, I was talking to my sister who was in college, my older sister, and I said, "How am I going to tell my parents that I got kicked out of high school? This is not going to go well." And my sister said, "Enroll in college. If you enroll in college and you tell them you were just going to college, they're not going to care." So she walked me over to the enrollment. I enrolled. I went up immediately to the newspaper to also sign up as a writer. And then I went home and told my parents, "I don't want to go to high school anymore. I want to go to college." And they said, "Okay." And I didn't have to explain the whole backstory of what had happened before that. And it was a great college was better for me than high school was by a long shot.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I honor that. I'm proud of you, man, because I read somewhere the word chafing. He was chafing from the system in school. And I'm not sure. There's this thing I'm picking up from you about creativity, and certainly with the thread of humor and the gifts you have, because you obviously had advanced education from what I read in your intelligence. There's a lot of people in the world that run companies today. And some of the greats you hear about, like Zuckerberg, and even people like Einstein who dropped out of school. But it's not because they were bad people. It's because entrepreneurs need to go out and create. They need to go do something. And sometimes the school system doesn't, kids can't sit every day and do the same thing over and over again. They're curious and they got to create. And so whether that's part of the reason or not, you went into college and then you did some really cool things. You started a business, help us understand that. And then also, I don't want to make this about, culture, but the truth is, Ron, what are we pretending not to know? There's a lot of people from your background that come to America, North America. I was the only brown guy in the boardroom when I became an executive. And so there's a lot of people I talk to, immigrants, who feel, because of the belief systems and the barriers in their own minds, that they can't be successful in another country. Tell us about the company you started, and what did you do to overcome those beliefs that sometimes are out there?
And I think that's a good point, because again, in most companies that I've been in, I've been the only person of color either, or somebody that wasn't of the US. And first of all, when I went to college, I was editor before I was 18, and happenstance, the whole senior group graduated and there wasn't anybody left to take over, and the newspaper went bankrupt. So I got my first taste of really running something, and I loved that. And then I became Senate president. And then as soon as I graduated, the next thing I went to was I was going to be a psychologist. I mean, my degree's in social psychology. I was going to help people with addiction. And after I was starting to work on my master's and do that, I came home one time to my then girlfriend and said, if I have to do this for the rest of my life, I'm in a lot of trouble, because I hate it. I feel their pain. I feel what they're going to. And I can't help them because I get paralyzed by that. So then I looked around and thought, what else can I do? And the only other skill I really thought I had was selling. So I started a business. And again, on a whim, I knew a lot about computers and I knew a lot about selling. So I started going out to companies and saying, if you need help setting up computers, I can do this. And that started my first business. It eventually grew. We eventually got bought out by a major consulting company. All the people who were involved, we had 10 employees. We shared the money. Even though I was the only owner, I shared the money with everybody there. And then we all left. In fact, everybody left the company. The company ended up going down because we all left, because we had more money than we thought we would ever need, which we spent very quickly and then had to find new jobs. But all through that, the one thing I learned at the newspaper and starting my own company was that I had to be me. And me is, I'm Cuban culture. I was raised by my parents. I'm loud. I talk with my hands. I like to make fun of things. And when I tried to be somebody I wasn't and try to fit in, I immediately became very awkward and very self-conscious. And my father was the one who taught me to not do that. Sorry, you were going to say something?
No, and by the way, when I look down my paper, usually when we're in the studio, people don't see me. I'm making notes. I'm a visual guy, and this is how my brain works. So already the page is like, holy crap, it's full of stuff. Your dad's name, your dad's name is Len. Right. No, you continue, man. It's a good story.
And again, I think my dad told me that, and there was something that he told me that I think really makes a difference, and I think especially for people who have a strong culture behind them. My dad said, when you go somewhere, you are going to live or die on two things: how good you are and how much people follow you and respect you. If you try to be like everybody else, number one, you're not going to stand out. And number two, you're not going to be genuine, which is something I liked about the way you always describe your show, as being genuine. And that, for me, my father said, and even if you were to be successful as somebody else, what would be the point in that? Why would you want to be successful as somebody you're not? So be who you are. And you may, I don't run a Fortune 500 company. I run a company of 50 employees. But for me, that's my fit, and that's where I am, and that's what I do. And I'd much rather be that, to use an old term, I'd rather be the head of a mouse than the tail of a lion. But for me, being who I was and who I am was more important to me than getting along with everybody. And what I found was that when I am who I am, people like me for who I am. When I'm somebody else, they can turn on you because you're not genuine. And when they realize that you're not, that dispels a lot of the respect for you. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's.
No, it resonates. I wanted to just read another line out of the longer bio. By the way, everybody, I had Ron's official bio, and then I dug and found his other bio, which has all the real human nuggets in it, which I just love, Ron. I read a line here. It says, out of college, Ron struggled to find his true calling. And I'm just going to throw a few things at you and let you comment. But isn't that the truth? I mean, Napoleon Hill wrote some good things in Think and Grow Rich, that less than about 5% of people in the world get off that unthinking treadmill of work back, retire, to actually discover. And in the work I've done, especially as a executive type CEO guy, I grew up in my career being unauthentic. And so the rules I learned in my childhood, and you mentioned your wife's background, mine's a little bit a similar story, addicted parent. You know, as children, the first 10 years, that just wires the thought patterns. And how my dad taught me to lead as a command and control, just do as I say, high standard. I took those rules into the workplace to lead teams, and I won awards. But I got to a point where I stopped being able to gel a team and build deep relationships with people. And I remember I had a coach one day when I became my first CEO position, and they broke me. She said to me, if you want to stay here, you got to change. And I couldn't see it. It was a blind spot. And what it really is what you said. You nailed it. It's brilliant in that I was unauthentic. I was showing up as a person who is what I call a red personality, a power base, but I'm really about intimacy, about relationships. And, you know, I'm verbose and I use emotion in the way I speak. I wasn't doing that. And another part of that was I wasn't doing what I thought I was doing what I thought somebody thought I should do in the world. A teacher influenced me to go into business. My father said money matters. I want to say this, and I'll give it back to you because I want to know about Len Master, that my dad taught me, you know, there's many gifts, and one of the biggest ones that stays with me is outwork everybody in the room and never put your hand out. Nobody's ever going to give you anything. And I got to tell you quickly that you saw my TED Talk, and I've had a concussion and some of a journey to get through that. And I've been doing a side hustle, which I talked about in that talk, going to Costco and doing night stalking in a warehouse to keep physically active. Now, I've never talked about that as much on my show because it was embarrassing. You know, my buddies, my executive pals would say, "Are you crazy?" And I'd say, "I don't really care," because my head wasn't working. I went and did that. And I remember in my interview, I walked in, I didn't even know how to dress. And they said, "Geez, we looked at your resume, you could run this place." and this lady's talking to me. And I go, "Well, look, it says seasonal. And apparently I'm only going to be here for 2 months. I just want a couple months of physical work." And she says, "Why do you want to work here?" And I said, here's the thing. If in 2 months, I'm not in your top 5% of workers by my ethic, you should fire me. And she looked at me and she just stopped and she said, "Oh no, I'm going to hire you. Go get some steel-toed shoes and report back here in 2 weeks." And I worked my butt off, like my dad said, in his voice in my head. I did all that, and I didn't use my ego. I didn't fall on my credentials, and they promoted me. And you know, it was what it was. Be yourself. Be authentic. You wrote a book called the Len Master, or you can clarify the title, Lessons from the Len Master. Let's get into that. This is a lot about your relationship with your dad and things you learned. Tell us more.
And I got to say, my father and I don't have a real easy relationship. My father is very loving, but very strict and can be very structured. And I'm not good with structure. But I've always had a lot of respect and obviously a lot of love for my father. And as I started to go through, I had written the first book I ever wrote was a novel. And I've been working on it for 30 years. And I physically have a collection of almost 200 rejection letters when I've tried to pitch that novel to editors and to publishers. And some of them are brutal. I mean, you think they're going to be just form letters, and they're not. They're, you know, some of them go out of their way to say, get a different job. Don't do this. So, you know, that was my experience. When I decided I was going to write another book, I was thinking about business and how to share, you know, things that I've learned and advice, because I enjoy that. And as I started to tell this in a story form, because I think narratives are much more informative than, you know, just giving advice, every single one reminded me of something in my childhood that my father told me. My father and I would play marathon chess sessions. And that's how my dad thinks. My dad thinks 10 moves ahead. My dad thinks, what am I going to do? How is that going to influence what you're going to do? And then how am I going to react to that? And he would give me all these lessons while we were doing that I didn't even know I was absorbing. And as I started to write advice, I realized I wasn't writing my advice. I was writing how I interpreted his advice. So I turned around and I decided to write about him, Lessons from the Len Master. His name was Len, and it was a play on Zen Master. Yeah. And I wrote that book in 2 weeks. And then getting back to something you said about not doing handouts, my experience in life has been that anytime you do something worth doing, it's because somebody's helped you do it. I wrote this book and I felt very good about it. I sent it to my father, and my father loved it, which he's not, effusive with praise. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, I expect that from you. He was very happy about it. And I showed it to my oldest daughter, who's a good writer. She loved it. And she said, Dad, let me pitch it to some editors and some publishers. And I said, no, I've done this, and it's heartbreaking. And she said, let me do it. And 2 weeks later, she came back and said, I have a publisher for you. I wouldn't have done that on my own. Somebody ran with my idea and did it. And it was great that it was my daughter. I love that. But, even though my father was always very strict, he was very good at taking the time to tell us a story and hope that we would pick up the nugget from it. And by the way, these were 4-hour stories. My father can't say anything in 30 seconds. But those resonated with me for the rest of my life. And that whole book is just collections. I'm taking credit for stuff that he did, and then I'm just running in my stories of how I applied it. But I think that overall, the one thing that struck me over and on is, in my life, it was the other way around. If you can't accept handouts, I don't think you can help other people.
I love that. First of all, 4-hour stories. And I think that connects back to what you told me a little while ago about the family dinners, 2.5 dinners. I mean, man, in my home, I crave for a 10-minute story. And I remember sitting at dinners with my father-in-law, who's passed away. My wife's Italian, and I mentioned that earlier off the show. And he would tell his stories about the Great Depression and how he grew up herding sheep on the mountainside in Italy. And man, today, when I'm doing my radio show, I managed to bring some of those stories. And I love it that you wrote it as a narrative. I'm going to read your book. I want to write a review for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're wired to tell stories. In fact, we don't remember facts and figures, as you know. We remember how you made us feel. And what I really like is how you're giving a book. I think it's a particularly special book, given that your father and you're immigrants, and so this is like Yoda and Luke, and then you're passing that on to the next generations. I think it's cool. I saw the cover, and everybody, it's a pretty cool book. You got to get it and check it out. And well, by the way, you have something special you'll give us at the end on that. Tell us what's one of the biggest lessons that Len Dad taught you. Let me break it into two parts.
Okay.
That he taught you that. Sorry to step on you there, but I did. You're awesome. One lesson that he taught you that helped you create success, because I think you said something which I interpret as standing on the shoulders of others is really the pathway to success. But then one thing he taught you to deal with your biggest challenge or failure that you had in life.
So two things on that. One, I'm not a team player by heart. I play tennis. I play racquetball. I like sports where I win or lose on my own. So my instinctive being is to do things on my own. And my father told me over and over again, whatever success you can do, however impressive you are, you multiply that by 1. If you can get 10 people to be on your team, they're going to outdo you, even if they're even if they're half as qualified as you are, even if they're half as driven as you are. If you have 10 people out there doing something for you, you've multiplied yourself. And that lesson is something that I think he hit on me over and over again, of saying, and if you don't feel right being on the team, then create another team. Get together with the people that you like and help amplify them. And that was a very tough lesson for me to learn. And I don't think I learned it until I was fully an adult, that no matter how good I thought I was, 5 people who were average could beat me if they teamed up together. And that, I think, is something that people need to learn. And I think it's something that CEOs need to learn. I've started companies. I've been an entrepreneur. They've been my ideas. But whenever other people ran with it, the ideas were successful. When I thought it was just me, it died on the vine. It only got as far as I could go, or as soon as I lost interest in it. And then let me also say one other thing, that the best thing I think my dad ever gave me was that when you have a culture, when you have a history, whether it's family or national or religious, you have stories and you have ways of interpreting those stories. For us, even bad stories always have a funny ending to it because we found humor in it. Those stories, that idea that you are part of an overall story that started hundreds of years ago in some people's cases, and you're the continuation of this, also, I think, gave me the idea that I have to worry about what's going to happen 10 or 20 or 100 years after I'm gone. And how did I help influence those stories? And I know that sounds trite, but it really does change your perspective on the things that you do. And along those lines, in the deepest, darkest point where I had 3 children, I was unemployed. I went into a Blockbuster to apply for work, after I was already doing marketing and everything else. And they told me I didn't have enough customer service experience to do this. And my wife was in college. That's when my dad said to me, now decide who you are. Are you going to continue to be the person you are and have faith in what's going to happen? Or are you going to, just break down, do whatever you can to raise money and focus on that and forget about your family? And whatever you do now is who you really are. And to me, that was the best lesson I ever had at the worst point I can think of in my life.
Just before I add to that, how old were you at that Blockbuster moment?
I was probably 29, 30. Again, 3 kids. My wife was in college and we were looking to see that she might have to drop out because I didn't have a job anymore. That was a pretty tough time. And I know people go through that all the time. And especially now, but for me, it was a tough time.
Absolutely. Well, there it is. I mean, the hero's journey narrative is by Joseph Campbell is behind my show, and we're all connected by a thread according to that research. And unfortunately, Campbell's in his own teaching says that we hear this call to go on an adventure and explore who we really are, and then come back and do something different. But most people, they don't answer the call, and when something not so good happens, they do. And I always wait in an interview for that moment when the guest tells that kind of a story, and you did it. You nailed it. I love you, and I love the story, because if you don't tell that story on my show, and I'm not going to drag it out of you, you're not authentic. And I don't release shows of people who cover up their vulnerability. So I want to honor you. That 3 kids unemployed I call it a Blockbuster moment. We'll remember that part of the story, because here's the thing, Ron, everybody listening to this show, it's the people who say, oh my God, that's my story. And I want to know how you got past 29 to look at what you did. That, to me, now makes you real and inspiring. So way to go. I love how Dad helped you through that. And also find it very pleasing to hear you speak of your dad's lessons and how you brought into your life. For a long time, up until a few months before my dad died, I blocked him because, the brain sees things that it doesn't like, and it blocks us seeing the good. And that was my relationship with my dad. But then I found that Blockbuster moment when I reconnected with Dad. And I think in the next book I write, I'll be telling more stories about the things I learned and he taught me. So way to go on that. Let's get into the last piece of the interview I want to do with you. And that's about, we talked about many things about your passion, about your business. I have an interesting perspective on businesses. I've seen a lot of this from entrepreneurs who started off the side of their desk, it explodes into success. And they want to bring in professional management services so that they can go write their books and speak and have a life. But many of them can't let go. I was hired once to be a general manager in a company by a president who was the owner, and he was a micromanager. And at the end, he really wanted to sell or step back, but, losing control. You've done that. You brought in a team, from what I've understood, into your business so that, you can inspire them to lead and run it. How did you make that transition in your mind to sort of trust other people to take control?
And again, I think a lot of that comes from my father. When I was getting to the point here where I was running the business, but it was wearing me down, I listened to your TED Talk and I identified with that pressure. Whenever I get over anxious or overstressed at work, I have this reoccurring dream where I'm back at the job I liked the least, which was at a corporation. I was a chief marketing officer, and I dream that I'm back there. And when I wake up, I say, all right, well, it's not that bad. I can deal with it. But I started to identify that I was liking less and less of what I was doing. And I was losing my sense of humor. I was losing the soft touch that I was doing with people. I was getting more sharp and more critical of the people I worked with. And that's when I decided that the reason for me was as the company grew, I just couldn't do that every single day and still do the things I wanted to do. So I was very fortunate. I brought in a great partner, and he's helping to grow the company and growing it into new ways. But we just decided to take this whole team of middle managers and say to them, in a small company, you don't usually have that. And we took 5 or 6 and we said, we are going to make you the management team, and we're going to teach you how to do this, and we're going to mentor you, and you're going to take over. And we have been very fortunate that they've done a fantastic job. I mean, I do a lot less today than I did before. And even, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Our business, thankfully, is still growing and still doing well. But we're all working from home. We don't get to see each other. And these middle managers have been the glue that have brought everything in together. I couldn't have done that without having a team of people to do it. And for them to do that, and for my partner to come in and bring another, it took a lot of weight off of me, and has made me enjoy what I do a lot more, and has made me less of a jerk. I think one of the biggest dangers of being a CEO is that you become such a jerk sometimes because you think you're infallible. And it's nice to show a lot of other people doing a better job than I would have done it myself. And I can say, you know what, I can breathe and relax, and I don't have to carry all the weight. There are other people that will carry the water for me. And that makes you 10 years younger just when that happens.
Yeah, I like that. I was just writing that down on my paper, carry the water for me. My nickname you the water boy here. And it brought my mind to another book. What British Columbia Lions is our football team. Our CFL is the equivalent of your great NFL. By the way, I've been down to the U.S. to some of those games. I mean, it's a spectacle walking into a stadium when you can't even hear yourself think. But this fellow was on the sideline as a coach, and he wrote a book called The Water Boy, Lessons Learned from Being a Servant Leader to Football Players. So thanks for that nugget. Everything you said really resonates with me. The thing I want the audience to know, just in a snippet, is your company. We didn't get into what you do, but what does your company do if we wanted to be a client?
We create marketing and website programs, online marketing website programs. We have 2 divisions. 360 Biz does it for Fortune 500 companies. So we develop their websites. We help them market. We do a lot of content for it. And then we also do the same thing for government through our 360 Civic website or business. And so we have large cities, municipalities, state and county governments. We create websites that hundreds of people manage and that millions of people see, and that especially now during the pandemic, you're doing everything through your city's website or the DMV or anything else. We create the websites that help do that.
Thank you. I have a question that comes out of that I think about my own business. And this is one, you are the expert in that area. I'm not. And, you talk about CEOs being generalists. And by the way, I'm wandering here back to a comment you made about CEOs. I think that one of the reasons, and I've been in those shoes, that we can be arrogant, or what that is, you said, is a lot of people who run companies aren't accountable. They're not accountable to anybody. There's no board, there's no boss, there's no performance review. You get away with things, and you have different standards. And my definition of leadership, which I always say is a leader's number one job, is to create other leaders and to inspire people to follow you. Because the idea is, if I run my business now, Ron, I want to step away from it, not be the focal point, so I can go and live my passion. And so the question is about websites. Just I struggle with one thing, finding somebody there's so many people out there bid to do work on the website. Like, I want to have my website, and putting a bug in your ear here, because we'll probably talk about it one day, to have my website redone, because it's not where I want it to be. But it was done by somebody I trusted who outsourced it to India. And I've run a technology company before. My background is general, but I ran a financial service company that built a loans origination system. I'm very familiar with it. And the back end code was a spaghetti mess. And so when you know the back end of technology, my website was outsourced to India, and I was all of a sudden left hanging to deal with that. And now my website is just stuck. So you go out and you get quotes, and you say, hey, who do you know? You ask a friend, because you don't know how to vet and find the right. Maybe just give us 1 or 2 tips on when you're looking for a provider to do work on building or creating your website, what are a couple things, we should look for, or however you want to say that?
And very quickly on that, in websites, and by the way, my personal website is not where I wanted to be either, but I say if you're going to build a good website, you need three things. The first thing you need to know is know what your vision is. What's your voice? It's just like you write a book or you do a show. What is the voice that you want to get out there? The second thing is to understand that people that write code and people that design are two different people. You usually can't find one provider. You find a team of people and you get them talking to each other before they do anything else. And then the last thing I would say, and this is for anybody who's thinking of doing a website, ask the people you're going to join, how do you know when the website's done? And that answer is going to tell you a lot. If they give you, it's when the code's written, it's when we put a shit live, it's when we do this. If they give you, tactics rather than saying it's when people are coming to your website and they're performing and they're doing what you expect them to do. If you don't get that answer, you need to be talking to a different group.
Oh, thank you. Those are great tips, teaching moments on the show for anybody looking to do that work. Reach out to Ron, even if it's for a conversation. I think with the COVID pivot, the age of 19, everybody going online, it's more important now that my brochure to the world, I drive traffic to my website. So you're doing great work there. As we go to wrap up here, I want to honor you with 4 leadership words. You see me writing on my paper as you're talking. I don't script these, Ron. And so here they are. The first one is authenticity. You are, man. Number 2 is energy. There's this passion or this energy that comes out of you, and I just love it. Passion, because you talk about the things that are not just work, but the things like family and your roadsters, the things that you love to do, and I think that lights me up. And humility, when you start talking about your struggles and the lessons learned from Dad and shedding the spotlight on other people, I think that's awesome. So let's turn it back to you before we wrap up. You have a little something special to put out there for the audience, and tell us where they can get a hold of you and your body of work.
So at any time, people can contact me at RZ Seminars, so RomeoZuluSeminars.com. You can email me from there. And by the way, a lot of what I do is answer people's questions, and that's free. I don't charge for any of that. I love doing that. So if you have a question on business, if you have a question on a situation, get on there, send me a contact, and I'm happy to do that. And that's pro bono. There's no charge for that. I have my book for everybody who listens to your show. I appreciate you having me on here. We'll have 50% off. And there'll be free shipping with that. So I'll give you a link after we're done here to a page where anybody who listens to your show can come on there, buy the book, get it over. And if you're giving it as a gift to anybody, there's a little form on there, fill it out, and I'll do a little personal, for what that's worth, a little personal inscription on the book for the person as a gift. But, it's wisdom from my dad, and I'd like to get it out there as much as I can. It's not about selling the book. It's about having that wisdom go on, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome. For those who just tuned in about the book, it's called Lessons from the Len Master. Len was Ron's dad, and it's written as a novel, which, by the way, I'm a writer too. Patrick Lencioni wrote some great books, The 5 Temptations of a CEO, The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, and he wrote it as a fable. I can't get through books, Ron. The words bounce around a page, but I was able to buzz through those because they're storytellers, so I will definitely enjoy reading yours. And I want to just now take a moment before we wrap up. I don't do this on the show very often, so I just want to turn some better lighting on here. Hold on. That behind me here on the green screen, we have an image. And who's that guy there? By the way, he has a bit of hair. This is my COVID-19 malfunction haircut, which I did myself. I'm glad you're laughing there, Ron. We'll get you later. This is what we call the challenge coin. And I mentioned to Ron offline that I'm inducting him into the Quiet Warrior Tribe. Here's what this is all about, everybody. And I'm very emotional about this. That when I started the show, I wanted to bring leaders from all over the world to it who would not just talk about how great they are, but get deep into their story of pain and struggles. And that's where the lessons are, how they became what they are, so others can learn from it. We're leaving legacies here for the next generation through people like Ron Zayas. And so I said to myself, I want to have an award. So I researched and found the challenge coin. The challenge coin was created in the World War II era, and soldiers carried them in their pockets to commit to each other. Now, if Ron and I didn't show up and he didn't have his coin, maybe he had to buy drinks. The coin today is used by first responders to create community. Alcoholics Anonymous, all the members have coins. All over the world, you'll see these coins popping up. So I had these coins just hand painted and crafted and minted. I designed it myself in the US. Sorry, Canada. And what you see on the front there is the show art and an image of me, which I thought was kind of cool. And then on the back is another side. It's the hero's journey narrative, which is the actual narrative of my show by the research of Joe Campbell. This comes in a cherry box, and when we release the show, it'll be awarded to you, Ron. And when you receive this, there's a very big honor, but also commitment that you commit to carrying this coin and being part of all the other Quiet Warriors who come on the show, be connected by a thread of your stories, continue to live with passion, take action, and change the lives of people with what you do. So I want to honor you and welcome you to the Quiet Warrior Tribe. This show will not go on the cutting room. You're welcome. So, yeah, so great. So on that note, everybody, find the show on your favorite podcast channel. Give it a high rating to honor Ron, his work. Get his book. Please read it to learn from Ron and some lessons from Len, his father. And it's a novel. You'll enjoy that. And we'll see you again on the Quiet Warrior Show. And this will be released as a YouTube video in the near future and as an international podcast. Ron Zayas, thanks for being on the show. We'll have you back again.
Thank you. I'd love to come back, and thank you for the time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca